Hello and welcome. I'm Chris Corey, Superintendent of Fairfield-Suisun Unified School District. Since closing our school campuses on March 13th, COVID-19, the questions we received most often are, when are you going to reopen? And when you do reopen, how will you ensure my child's safety? Over the past 100 days, staff has been working diligently on planning the reopening of our campuses. At the June 18th, 2020 board meeting, our staff shared plans to reopen our campuses fully with safety precautions in place beginning at the start of 2020-2021 school year. There is a link to that presentation and the board on the FSUSD.org website. I encourage you all to review this information if you haven't already done so. Staff has developed a continuum for reopening that allows for us to become more restrictive if necessary. We believe that our students need us, and we believe that this decision is important for our students' education, future, and well-being. They need some sense of normalcy and security that comes along with going to school on a daily basis. While we cannot guarantee zero risk in reopening our campuses, we are planning to have processes and procedures in place to minimize the risk. Thank you to all of those who have submitted questions for today. On June 23rd, which is today, we are going to try our best to answer your questions. And we know that in the next 58 days between now and the opening of schools, that things may change and more details to our plans may be determined. We'll be providing another question and answer session on Thursday, July 23rd. Please continue to visit our website, Facebook page, and Twitter post for up-to-date information. We may not get to all the questions asked in today's format, but we will include them in a frequently asked questions document that we will post following this meeting. I just want to say again that we have 58 days between now and the start of the year. So at this point in time, this is our best, and we are going to remain flexible. I'm going to turn this over now to Tim Gorey, our Executive Director of Administrative Services and Community Engagement, and he will facilitate.
Thank you, Superintendent Corey. It's my pleasure to be here to facilitate this question and answer session with our directorial and assistant superintendent staff for the public. Back on June 18th, after our previous board meeting, we sent out a form, a Google form, to our parents and to staff, asking for them to provide us with questions that we could answer at this meeting. And so they did that, and by the time Sunday night rolled around, we had 750 questions that had been submitted, and we rolled through those questions, looked for duplicates, and narrowed it down to about 140 questions that were unique. And so those are the 140 questions that we come into this day with, and we will attempt to answer as many of those as we can. Any questions that we're not able to get to, we will put in the frequently asked questions document that we will put up on our website and advertise after all of this is over. Questions that come in after the cutoff period, we will include in our next meeting in July. And so now we're going to get started and ask the questions of the staff. Our first question is for Superintendent Chris Corey. The first question is, when can families expect to hear about the plans to reopen for the upcoming school year?
So we shared those plans on June 18th with our governing board. We have posted them on the website, and they're available. Our plan right now, as I mentioned, is to open fully 5 weeks beginning in August and have safety precautions in place. In addition, we also have a virtual academy that we are starting. So if families, parents do not feel that it's best for them to send their students to school 5 days a week, we have that as an option.
And our second question for Superintendent Corey is the district considering moving the school start date up to July?
The governor put that out, I think about a month or so ago, that schools should start thinking about reopening in July. Our district is not considering that as an option, although we are going to open summer programs.
Thank you. And the next question is for Kristen Witt, our Director of Secondary Education. Kristen, what will school hours and days per week look like?
Thank you, Mr. Corey. In phase 4 of the continuum, the start and end times will be very similar to previous years. The internal schedules will vary as each site builds their internal schedule for both recess and lunch.
Thank you, Kristen. And this next set of questions will be for Sheila McCabe, our Assistant Superintendent of Educational Services. Sheila, when are FSUSD schools reopening?
As of today, we plan to reopen in phase 4 of the continuum, with school starting on August 19th, 2020. The district is running a summer program, as Superintendent Corey just mentioned, and part of that program has already started. The summer program is operating in what we would consider phase 3 of the continuum, with some of the programs operating in person and some of the programs operating via distance learning.
And Sheila, if the pandemic gets worse during or before the school year, what will be the move to ensure that our kids are safe?
The district will continue to work with Solano County Public Health to determine what precautions will need to be in place to minimize the risk of exposure. The district is using its multi-phase continuum with distance learning as the most restrictive environment and being fully open with no limitations as our least restrictive environment. Where the district, a school, or an individual classroom fall on that continuum will depend on the precautions that are necessary that will place the least amount of risk of exposure for our students and our staff.
And our next set of questions are for Dr. Melissa Farrar, who is our Director of Curriculum Instruction and Assessment. The first question is, how will you improve distance learning from how it was in the spring?
Well, we have learned a lot in the last few months. We had to shift gears very quickly into distance learning. So we'll be taking some time to evaluate what worked well for distance learning and what didn't work well and make adjustments to that plan accordingly.
Thank you. Can a student opt for virtual learning once the school year has begun?
Yes, students may request to transfer to the virtual academy at the trimesters if space is available.
And a third question for you, what is the latest that we can decide to participate in virtual academy or virtual school?
Families must complete and return the student agreement and expectation no later than July 31st to ensure enrollment in the 2020-2021 school year. Families completing this process after this date will be placed on a wait list and transferred on space availability.
Great. I have a question now for Michelle, who is our Assistant Superintendent of Business Services, about transportation in particular. The question is, who will be served by buses and how will you ensure social distancing on buses?
In an effort to transport with social distancing, home-to-school transportation will only be provided for our students on individualized education plans.
Great. Now I have a slew of questions about facilities and maintenance and operations, which we have Paul Speed here to help us with those questions. So Paul, who will be cleaning the classrooms during passing periods? Or are students kind of staying in one place and teachers are rotating classrooms? What does that cleaning process really look like?
Currently, the district is in the process of hiring and adding custodial staff, and classrooms will be cleaned and disinfected each evening.
Okay, so not necessarily between passing periods, but once a day in the evening.
Yes.
All right. Second question for you, Paul. What is going to be done to provide more sanitary bathrooms for the kids? Some people feel that they haven't been that sanitary in the past, and of course now they're even more heightened about this.
Well, as I mentioned, we're going to be hiring new staff and additional staff and they will be cleaning and stocking restrooms throughout the day, and we'll be sanitizing our restrooms each evening at the end of the school day.
And I think it's important also to note that we will have signage, because what we don't want to have happen is if for some reason soap dispenser in a bathroom is without soap, that they wait till the end of the day and go home and report it, but that it's reported immediately.
And speaking of that, Paul, can the FSUSD supply enough hand sanitizer and hand soap or disinfecting wipes for every classroom?
Currently, our suppliers are telling us yes.
And another one, would there be access to warm water and antibacterial soap for kids?
We will have soap available at all sinks for hand washing. Not all of our sinks will have warm water. However, as warm, hot water is not key to prevention, the district will encourage the 20-second hand washing at this time.
Great. Now we're back to Sheila McCabe for about 5 questions here that are all somewhat related. The first one, Sheila, is, will students' temperatures be taken daily to avoid infecting other people?
Self-monitoring is going to be essential in phase 4 of the continuum. At this time, the expectation is that the families and staff will take their own temperature prior to coming to school or to work.
How will the children be protected against catching COVID, considering that distancing will be impossible in a regular classroom?
According to a news release by the American Academy for Pediatrics that was put out on June 2nd of 2020, the risk of COVID-19 transmission among groups of children has not been well studied, but the current research suggests that the risk is much lower than in the adult population. The district goal is to minimize the exposure, not to eliminate it. Safety precautions, including self-screening, washing or sanitizing hands, face coverings, providing as much social distancing as possible, and eliminating visitors to the campus are all measures that we're putting in place to help reduce that risk to our students and our staff. The plan will be reviewed continue to be reviewed and responsive to conditions as they change, and is being reviewed by Solano County Public Health.
Thank you. It seems like we might be opening schools a little bit too fast, considering that the COVID positive cases are rising right now in California. What's your thought on that?
You know, the plan would be much different if we were opening today, rather than 58 days from today. Given the rate at which California and Solano County are reopening, staff believe that phase 4 reopening is the correct phase on this 5-phase continuum. Staff will continue to monitor the situation, and if circumstances change over the next 58 days, we may have to move some schools or the district into a lower phase on that continuum. Again, we believe that phase 4 is the correct phase on the continuum, and are working with County Public Health to ensure the appropriate safety precautions are put in place.
We know that phase 4 doesn't include a 50% capacity type of situation. We're planning right now for all students who are not in virtual schools to be on campus when we start, but different phases that we might be in would have to do with a possible 50% capacity type of scenario. So if schools did happen to open only to 50% capacity, and students will only be on campus, say, half the time, what does that mean for working parents? And how would that look?
The district is still finalizing the plans for what a phase 3 or phase 2 of the continuum would look like if we needed to open, whether that be at the beginning of the year or at some point in time during the year. But we will have those plans finalized before the start of the school year. The district anticipates having those plans published in late July. It will be hard for our working parents, and as Superintendent Corey mentioned at the start of this meeting, that one of the components that led to the decision to open in phase 4 was in order to be able to support our parents that are working so that the children are at school.
I think that was actually one of the big considerations. We heard from a lot of families about the concern that they had to go back to even from our staff. We had staff members who expressed the thought that if I'm having to teach full time, but my own children are only having to go 2 days a week, what am I supposed to do with childcare? And will the district be able to provide childcare? And so that was one of the reasons, that contributed to the fact that not only do we believe that our kids need school every day because they need to be learning, and we think we can teach them better in person, but also for consideration, we didn't want kids unsupervised at home or cause of those problems for our staff.
And Sheila, one last question in this group. The argument has been made that since hair salons and restaurants and other businesses are opening right now, that schools should be open as well. These establishments, however, are following guidelines established by the state and the county. How can schools be compared to these businesses when the state guidelines, not all of the state guidelines, are being implemented in school?
So at this time, the state does issue guidelines, and then the county actually then uses those guidelines to issue requirements that have to be met for a particular business to be open. At present, while the state has issued guidelines for schools to be open, there have been no regulations, requirements, mandates associated with those guidelines given to school districts to follow. They are leaving it up to the school districts to work with their local county public health departments in order to identify what are those components that can be implemented in the schools and in the district in order to minimize the risk of exposure to the students and the staff.
Great, thank you. Cindy Brown, don't want to leave you out. Our Director of Elementary Education, or just for a little while longer anyway, before her retirement. Cindy, I have a few questions for you. One is, will the district follow state recommendations to limit class sizes to 12 to 15 students per class?
Well, unfortunately, excuse me, we do not have the staffing or the room to accommodate that guest number, but in phase 4, we are opening in the fall with all students in the classroom that are and socially distanced. That's the plan going forward today.
Cindy, can parents of younger students, like kindergartners, grades 1 and 2, walk their child to their classroom?
This is a tricky one. We know that that's a comfort level for many of our parents, but each school is planning this fall to have a meet and greet time before school starts. That allows parents and students to see their rooms and the students to be more comfortable on the first day of school. The policy will be to limit parents on campus on the first day of school and every day until restrictions are lifted.
Great. Okay. And next question for Cindy. Teachers of the younger grades are able to teach so much more with parent involvement in the classroom normally. Our school doesn't have aides that help out except for resource teachers who work with specific kids. How can they continue at that level that they are without some parent help in the classroom?
The need to limit adults in the room due to the possible exposure is really the priority at this time. While we acknowledge the huge benefit of parents in our classrooms, parents will be phased back in when the district moves to phase 5 in our plan.
Thank you. Now this one may be for you, Cindy, but Kristen might jump in as well. Are the children going to have time in the yard or on the playground, and how will they be protected during these times, including passing periods and lunch, arrival and dismissal?
Well, it'll be a little bit different between secondary and elementary, but students in the secondary schools will still have the opportunity to be outside during lunch with limitations on the number of students out. Students will be outside during passing periods, and for those students that are taking physical education courses, we're developing plans to allow for play and allow for social distancing. Elementary students will have access to recess, but with limited numbers of students on the yard. Our internal schedules will be changed to allow less students there. There will be more frequent recess, and lunch times and more frequent lunch times to limit the number of students at any one time.
Great, thank you.
Anything to add?
Just to reinforce again, as I mentioned earlier, that each school site will be developing their internal schedules for lunchtime activities and even passing periods to ensure that they reduce the number of students that are out at the same time.
We may even have to go towards, if you go out to a grocery store now, you see these arrows that go up one aisle and down the other so people aren't passing. And we may have to look at our school site and develop that type of plan as well, so that maybe they're all, going in one direction.
Like Public Safety Academy?
Yes,
Like
just
maybe
like the Public
everybody
Safety
swims
Academy,
like
if you
Public
go there,
Safety Academy.
They already do something
Wow.
similar to that, but yes.
That might be interesting. Okay, well, I have a question again for Sheila. This one a little bit more about special education, speech therapy. How will speech therapy work, understanding that small groups in small rooms close together, face coverings will affect the ability to do that kind of work? What does that look like?
We anticipate at this time that there'd be no more than 3 students in any small group, with individuals wearing the personal protective equipment or PPEs. And we are in the process of securing PPEs in which the face mask is a clear covering so that you can see the mouth, because we do believe that that would be important in a number of circumstances, this being one of them. In addition, we'd be wiping down the surfaces in between each one of the sessions.
Thank you. I have a number of questions for Jennifer Taylor, who's our Assistant Director of Human Resources in charge of risk assessment. And so it's natural that she would have a number of the answers having to do with COVID-19. First question for you, Jennifer, is will the kids have to be vaccinated for coronavirus? Will that be mandatory to be coming to school?
At this time, there is no vaccine for coronavirus. The district will monitor the California Department of Education's requirements for vaccinations.
Great, thank you. And the second question for you, Jen, is will there be free mandatory testing prior to fall opening?
At this time, the district does not plan to provide free COVID-19 testing. There are several free testing sites in the area. Information on free testing can be found by visiting the Solano County Public Health website.
Thank you. And a third question for you. Please describe the screening process to attend school each day. Are there questions that are asked, a temperature taken, these sorts of things?
In accordance with the California Department of Education guidelines, staff and families of students will be asked to self-screen before coming to school each day. Individuals should screen for common symptoms of COVID-19, such as cough, shortness of breath, sore throat, and a fever that is 100.4 degrees or higher. If the individual has any of these symptoms or has been in close contact with or cared for an individual who has a positive diagnosis, they need to stay home.
Great, thank you. And a fourth question for you, Jennifer. Will masks be required, specifically N95 masks? And will gloves be required? And if so, will they be supplied by the district?
The Center for Disease Control provides recommendations for what is acceptable for a mask, which does include the N95, but is not limited to that. While the district will have a supply of masks available to its students and staff, they are encouraged to bring their own due to the district's limited supply. Gloves are currently not required to be worn.
I do want to add too, we presented Thursday, we had our presentation for the governing board ready to go. And I think on our presentation, we had face coverings and masks highly recommended. And then that day, the governor came out and said face masks in California are required. And so we're going to continue to follow the governor's guideline or his executive order, and that may change in the next 58 days. And so, but we will be, even if it changes, we will be highly encouraging face coverings.
Great. One last question for you, Jennifer, and this is a big one, I know a lot. What will happen if a student or a teacher at a particular school tests positive for COVID?
Once the district has been made aware of a COVID-19 positive test result, There will be an investigation to determine potential exposure to other students and staff. Notifications will be made to those affected individuals if applicable. Affected areas of the school will be cleaned and sanitized. Affected individuals will not be allowed to return until they've provided a negative test result. And the district will be working closely with Solano County Public Health throughout this entire process.
Thank you, Jennifer.
I think this one's important. And one of the things that we are going to strive to do is to keep students as much as possible into COPE. And that's strongly recommended from Solano County Public Health. It's just like with anything, when we've had other outbreaks or public health issues, you know, we had TB, I can't remember what the other one was that we had, but it was important because then they did the contact tracing and they were able to test those that they came in contact with. So that's going to be really important.
Great, thank you. Ken Whittemore, our Assistant Superintendent of Human Resources, has a couple of questions for him. Ken, why not open schools after Labor Day weekend if the numbers of COVID positive people are still climbing?
Oh, thank you, Mr. Gordy. That's a good question. The student calendar is worked on by a committee years in advance and is bargained with our labor partners. So it would be something we would have to go back and bargain with them and also take through to be approved by the Board of Education. So at this time, we think it's the most prudent measure to keep our calendar and work from there in the starting of school.
Great, thank you. And will school offices maintain social distancing and or wear masks?
And as the superintendent just stated, we will be following all the directives and mandates coming from the state of California and also the Solano County Public Health. So at this time, that answer would be yes. And in the next 58 days, we'll continue to monitor it and make sure that we get the most updated information out to our offices. And we would still at that time, ask that take place in our office.
Thank you, Ken. We have a slew of secondary education questions for Kristen Witt. Kristen, will fall high school sports be starting before school as in prior years?
Mr. Gore, I'm actually happy to say that yes, we've developed what we're calling a return to play for summer conditioning for our high school athletics. The return to play plan was developed following the guidelines from the California Interscholastic Federation and Solano County Public Health. And currently our athletic directors are actually training all of our coaches on what that plan entails. And messaging will be going out to the families from the school sites with regard to our summer conditioning plan. And in terms of our season starting in the fall, we're waiting for further guidance and guidelines from the CIF that will be released on July 20th in terms of our seasons of play.
Thank you. Will a combination of online learning and in-classroom learning be available to secondary education students?
So you've heard Superintendent Corey and Dr. McCabe talk about the continuum. So in phase 4 of the continuum, it is in-person instruction for all students. However, we do still have options available for families in our district. So for our students in any K-8 setting, they have the virtual school as an option for those families. And in our secondary sites of middle schools for 6 through 8 and our high schools 9 through 12, we do have long-term independent study as an option.
Thank you. Another one, Kristen, are desks going to stay a certain distance apart in classrooms?
We're going to work as diligently as we can to space furniture to allow for as much social distancing as possible and set up the configuration so students are not sitting face to face.
What high school and middle school sports will be allowed for the 2021 school year?
So very similar to my previous answer, we do have return to play plans in place for summer conditioning, and we're going to wait to release what seasons will be played following the July 20th guidelines from CIF, and we'll have our middle school sports follow in line with that as well.
Can a student in middle school elect to take a math and science class on campus for the in-person instruction and the remaining courses as distance learning?
A student could if they're participating in long-term independent study. So any student that's participating in long-term independent study always has the option of attending up to 2 courses at their home school site of residence, as long as scheduling permits it and it is allowed within and it fits within the constraints of the scheduling.
Great, thank you. And Kristen, how will PE be taught now at FSUSD, especially in the secondary level where PE classes are really the biggest classes that we typically have at a site?
Absolutely. It's a great question. And actually, we were lucky to have representation from our PE department on our start of the year committee in the planning. And so the PE department had gone back and gone through all of the standards, both at elementary, middle, and high school. And they were able to identify that 98 to 99% of the elementary and middle school standards can be taught in a social distance setting. And that looking at the high school standards, 85% of those standards can be taught in a social distance setting. And so the PE teachers will be working on focusing on those standards that can be taught within social distancing requirements. Oh, and I forgot, we will not have students dressing out. At this time, our plan is to not have students dress out.
Thank you. For high schools, where will students eat lunch? Will cafeterias be open or closed?
Great question as well. So we will continue to have high school lunch service. Both our cafeterias and our outdoor eating areas will be open. But as I had referenced earlier, each school site will develop internal schedules. So there will be multiple times for lunch. And so they will limit the number of students out. And they will work to ensure that they're managing the number of students that are in the building structure so that they ensure that they can maintain social distancing, while in there.
Great. Thank you. I know a lot of people who are aiming for certain universities and colleges next year or in the years coming for their students are wondering about this. Will the district use letter grades or pass-fail next year?
Yes, so just as we made the decision to maintain letter grades for this 2019-2020 school year, even during distance learning, we will continue with letter grades for the 2020-2021 school.
Thank you. And this one is for Kristen, but Cindy, if you would like to jump in after Kristen, feel free. Kind of a little deeper question about spacing in classrooms. Some schools and many classrooms have two-person tables. Some actually have tables that are made for more than two people, that are shared instead of individual desks for the students. Given social distancing and the dangers of close contact in shared areas, how do you plan to resolve this?
So similar to some of the answers earlier, classrooms will be set up for as much social distancing as possible. Desks will be configured so students, we limit the amount of face-to-face setup that's in the classroom. And I do want to give a big kudos out to a lot of our staff. Our teachers came in and were diligent in removing a lot of their personal equipment that was in the classroom, like extra refrigerators and other things that take up space. And so that's allowed for more space now in the classroom to be able to separate the desks at a larger capacity within the limited space that we do have. And so I do want to thank the staff that was able to come in and help with that to ensure that we can social distance as much as possible.
Thank you. Liz Tracy is our Assistant Director of Student Services, and she's here to answer 3 questions in this group that we have for Student Services. Liz, what are the new protocols for absences? Some people are fearing that 6 students will be sent to school in fear of district consequences of them being absent too much.
There are no new protocols regarding the absences. If your child is ill, they will be marked excused, and any student that is out for illness or excused reasons will be able to make up any work that they missed. There are no sanctions around attendance for excused absences.
Great, thank you. And if a family with open enrollment chooses online school, virtual school, and conditions improve, can their child re-enter the same open enrollment school that they were in before they entered virtual school?
The short answer is yes. Once a student transfers to a school via open enrollment, that open enrollment school actually becomes their resident school. So they return to their resident school, which by definition is the one that they open enrolled into. The only time a parent would lose their open enrollment status is if they disenrolled from the district altogether and then returned.
Thank you. And the third question for you, Liz, is if children have a temperature over 100.3, will it be excused, or are we to get in contact I should say excused automatically, or should they get in contact with a doctor and obtain a doctor's note?
Anytime a student is ill, the parent or guardian needs to notify the school to let them know of the illness that will be excused. Parents have 10 cumulative days throughout the school year in which they can excuse their own child's absence by calling in. After that 10 days, they will need a note by their physician to excuse further absences.
Great. Thank you, Liz.
You're welcome.
All right, back to Dr. Melissa Farrar. We have a group of questions for you, Melissa. Why is it that the new teacher orientation being held virtually in August is being held virtually in August, but schools are going to be opening as normal?
A good question. We're actually working to adjust the new teacher orientation to be able to have a blended approach where some sessions are in person and others are virtual. And part of that just happened because plans have changed, and so we're working under the ability to be able to be more in person, and so needing to shift that structure for the new teacher orientation as well. However, space has always been an issue at the start of school when we look at professional development, so we do want to make sure that we can have the breadth of PD available for folks in a format that is workable for all.
Great, and kind of a tag onto that question, a little bit more detail is being asked for about training for virtual school teachers. Will the FSUSD give the proper resources to teachers and staff who help with the students who choose to stay at home and do distance learning? What kinds of professional development will they be given?
We're actually working on two different threads for this. One specific to teachers participating in the virtual academy to really address the needs for full-time virtual instruction. We believe that those teachers do have some specific needs, and we want to be able to support that with the appropriate professional development. We are also looking at professional development to support our teaching staff should we need to move to distance learning so that we're better prepared in the coming year if we do need to move into a distance learning approach again.
I think this is important too because it was one of our considerations when we were looking at reopening school fully. You know, we asked our teachers to do a lot this year when we closed school and 2 weeks later start doing distance learning. That's a big ask, and they stepped up and did it to the best of all of their abilities. There was a lot of coaching that happened, but a lot of it they had to learn on their own. And so what we want to do is make sure that if we go into a blended model, that we are able to provide our teaching staff with some lead time and some professional development going into it. And that's our hope, that we can start the school year out, provide professional development should we have to move into that blended learning model. Because there's a lot. It's not just something that you can do very easily. I think our district did it better than most. I think that we really had a lot of our staff members who had already had access to Google Classroom and had been using some of those blended models. But we know that there's going to be professional development that is needing to happen in order to the quality of any type of.
And speaking of the new coming virtual school, how many kids have enrolled or have shown interest in the new K-8 virtual school?
There are currently 506 students who are interested in enrolling in the virtual academy. And again, enrollment is open until July 31st.
Thank you. Melissa, if kids do online schooling this year, will they still be automatically enrolled to attend school in person next year? Or do they have to re-register them to the in-person school if they want to go back?
The virtual academy becomes their school and will remain so should they choose to no longer participate in the virtual academy. They would need to re-enroll at their school of residence.
Will distance learning require the teacher to provide online instruction throughout the school day?
The short answer for that is yes. The longer answer is whether that's synchronous or asynchronous instruction, whether that's live teaching online or not. Again, that will require being in alignment with the distance learning plan. And right now, the distance learning plan is set up to do mostly asynchronous instruction. We're evaluating those plans and looking at what we need to do to shift to make sure we're addressing student needs and teacher needs in that plan, and really looking to make sure we're utilizing best practices for distance learning.
Thank you. And one last question for this group, for Melissa. What kind of testing will be done for children who are enrolled in virtual learning? As an example, we do map testing in our school district normally. Will that sort of thing be done?
Yes, all district and state assessments will be expected of students participating in in the virtual academy. We will need to have some community locations established for some testing purposes for the state assessment.
Great, thank you, Melissa. Next couple of questions are for Michelle Hinson, our Assistant Superintendent of Business Services. And this one is an interesting one having to do with liability. Will the schools bear the burden 100% of responsibility if a child is exposed to COVID-19?
Health and safety is a shared responsibility with our staff, parents, and community. Everyone can do their part in the burden of public health. We will make every attempt to control the environment at school, promote social distancing, promote the health guidelines that are provided by our health department. So it's a shared responsibility.
And also, Michelle, has it been considered to be able to place shields like that you can see through on desks, opposed to using face masks for students because of the difficulty of communicating with face masks?
It has been considered, but right now with the governor's executive order to require face masks, we feel that it is a safer option to contain the spread of germs.
Great, thank you. And this one also for Michelle. Are there additional procedures going to be added for food safety during meal times?
We actually have already a lot of food safety procedures in place because we've been serving the entire time with our students at school sites. But we are looking at flexing how we provide the meals in terms of where they eat or staggered times in order to promote the social distancing while they're having their meals.
And one more, sort of the flip side of the student liability question. It's about staff. Is the school liable if staff members get sick because they are working in the environment?
We have a dedicated and highly professional staff serving the students and families in this community. They are essential workers during this pandemic and have done a remarkable job. We are doing everything we can to minimize the risk. Should there be a workplace exposure, then the employee would be working with our district workers' comp claim administrator.
Thank you, Michelle. Really appreciate that. Now I have another group of questions for Paul Speed, facilities. Is the restroom usage still going to be available because some students need the restroom on a regular basis?
Yes, Tim. Restrooms will be monitored, stocked, and open and available for use for staff and students throughout the entire school day.
Thank you.
And we'll clean them regularly every night.
Great, thank you. Will outside groups or organizations be allowed to rent facilities or use facility use at any time during the 2021 school year?
We know that we have a lot of outside wants for the facilities, but the district is trying to mitigate the risk as much as possible. And so right now we are not taking facilities use applications.
This has been a tough one for us because our facilities, we believe we're part of the community. And so we've had a lot of community use. And so it's been difficult, and we'll continue to monitor that risk as time goes on. But we just think this is the best decision at this point moving forward, just because, if we're trying to clean our campuses at night and there are activities there, it just makes it more difficult to get those tasks done.
We definitely don't take any joy in not sharing our facilities with our community, that's for sure. So, Paul, will classroom doors remain open so that students can enter and exit without having to touch the door handle? I know it's been customary in the past to keep doors closed, sometimes because of potential intruders and security on campus.
We do know that fresh air is one of the studies that has come out as to provide some relief from the COVID-19. And so we're going to give teachers the choice, weather permitting, to open their doors. They are going to be asked and required to keep them locked in case we do need to close them and lock and shut the classrooms down quickly.
Thank you. And Paul, will elementary students be given disinfectant wipes to clean and sanitize their desks and chairs prior to and after using it?
No. Cleaning of desks and classrooms will be by staff members.
Will the sites that are currently under construction and have narrow pathways for travel be a problem? How will you maintain social distancing with those narrow pathways because of construction?
Those projects that we have in those situations are scheduled to be completed this summer, and so we shouldn't have those situations when school starts.
We like the answer to that question.
For
Good.
many reasons.
For many reasons. So great, thank you. Paul, will classes held in portables be supplied with wash stations since they don't typically have sinks?
No, not at this time. We will be providing hand sanitizers in the classrooms and soap and water in the restrooms.
Okay, and also, Paul, how often will the school district change the ventilation system, fans, or filters to keep from COVID-19 spreading all over the school?
We normally have a team that monitors and assesses our HVAC units. And right now, the district is currently on a 3-month rotation for filters, and they get rotated out throughout district-wide every 3 months.
Thank you. Sheila McCabe, we're back to you. Will each school in FSUSD have a quarantine space available for students to stay while they await pickup in the event that they become symptomatic?
Yes, so Mr. Gorey, we've asked each site to identify a location on their campus where a child can remain quarantined until they're picked up by their parent or guardian.
This was another issue that was really important to our employees because they don't want to be responsible for having sick students remain in their classrooms until their parents come. And so we do need to find a safe place on campus where anybody who is experiencing symptoms can be isolated until they get picked up.
Sheila, what social emotional teaching and supports are being put in place to ensure students actually feel safe and are comfortable reentering the learning environment?
Superintendent Corey talked a little bit about this in her opening as far as one of the reasons why we were looking at why we thought it was important to open at phase 4, and definitely the social emotional health of our students was one of those reasons. Director Witt mentioned the fact that there's a reopening committee that has been working on this really since near the end of April, that committee has been meeting and has a number of different staff members. One of the subcommittees of that overarching reopening schools committee is focusing on the social emotional supports needed for staff and students for the opening of the school year. And so while they're still finalizing what those plans will look like, it includes a number of individuals in our support system that provide social emotional support and looking at how do we roll that out to support our staff and our students. I do want to mention, and just kind of as something that we're very fortunate for, is that earlier this year we found out that we received a $2 million grant, and the focus of that $2 million grant is on increasing the social emotional supports for our staff and students. That is a grant, $2 million over the next 3 years, so it's not that it's going to have an immediate impact in August, but it is something that will be able to provide us with some additional long-term support that we haven't had in the past.
Great. We're excited about that grant and what that's going to bring to our students for sure. Sheila, will Life After School program be available? And if yes, what would the schedule for that be?
I'm not sure what the schedule is going to be by either the after school programming that is coordinated by the city of Fairfield or the city of Suisun City. Fairfield has communicated that they are planning an in-person program. The last I heard from the city of Suisun, and we did reach out to see if we could get the most current information, and I haven't heard back yet, but that they are also working on a program as well. And once we get that information, we'll be able to push it out as part of the question and answers that we'll be sending with regard to this and get that posted on our website as well.
Thank you. Sheila, is there a way are there things that we can do to ensure that students are not infected with COVID-19 who are not showing symptoms?
You know, the safety precautions that we've talked about under the phase 4 of the continuum is really the best thing that all of us can do in order to make each of us as safe as possible. So ensuring that we're wearing our face masks, ensuring social distancing as much as possible, frequently washing or sanitizing of the hands. Those types of measures are in place in order to minimize that risk, and particularly if it's minimizing the risk from somebody, whether it's a student or an adult, that is not showing symptoms.
Why do students have to be at the school for the entire day? Couldn't we just do hybrid classes and have half days or some days at school and some not at school?
Yeah. And so the hybrid days is something that is part of our phase 2 or phase 3 of the plan of this continuum, depending on the circumstances. We've determined that opening at phase 4 is really an equity issue. And there's a number of different things that we've talked about, but one of the driving pieces is the equity. We know our students, we know our district has an achievement gap, and we believe that when students aren't in school all of the time, it negatively impacts that gap. What we don't want to do by continuing to not have our kids in school is to then create a further access gap to education. And so we believe that if we can appropriately put in place safety precautions that we have reviewed with Solano County Public Health and believe that those safety precautions can minimize the risk, then it is best to open in phase 4 where kids are at school all day long.
Thank you. Will the plan be for the entire 2021 school year or just through the rest of this 2020 calendar year that we have, the plan that we have right now?
The plan is for the entire school year. I mean, if I could have my druthers, we could be in phase 5, which is totally open in December. But we have to be realistic and have a plan that covers the entire year, knowing that phase 5, which is totally open, if it's so warranted, we'd be able to go to that.
Is there any way that you could make it so that every person in class has what we would call a Zoom option or a video conferencing option available so that families can keep their student with the same instructor or teacher that they would have at their regular school, but also allow them to stay home and do distance learning?
Yeah, not under the plan as we currently have it. If a family is really interested in having their child remain home, then if they're in the elementary programs, then the virtual school is a great option for those families. Or if they're in a secondary school, our independent study is a great option for those families.
Do you think that 100% of our students will attend school at the same time when school starts?
So in phase 4 of the plan, the expectation is that if a student is not in the virtual academy or an independent study, then they will be attending school.
And Sheila, last question for this group. What is the threshold to determine whether or not school will open or close at any point in time?
Yeah, that's something that we have to work very closely with Solano County Public Health on. One of the things we've learned in past circumstances, similar to when we had the case with tuberculosis, I don't even remember now how many years ago that was, they really are able to support us and guide us in those decisions. And so while we haven't specifically outlined this is the threshold where this is going to happen, it will be in consultation based off of a number of factors that might include what is taking place at a particular school site, within a particular classroom, or within our greater community.
Thank you. Chris Clark, our Director of Technology Support Services, has a couple of questions regarding technology. Chris, welcome to the podium. First question. My first grader at Fairview was not issued a laptop device for distance learning. We're not singling out Fairview. This is just what the question was. And I think this might apply to some other schools as well. Other sites did give them out to first graders. How is it that the district is addressing this sort of technology inequity across the site?
So we're working with principals to address this concern. Many TK through first grade classrooms were using devices in groups or pods. As such, they didn't have enough devices to give one out to each student. So we're working now with principals to implement a plan for the start of the year to make sure each student has a device if we're in distance learning.
Thanks, Chris. And a second question, as quarantine could happen again, how has the district addressed the spotty internet and service connection strength for certain teachers' homes who normally would teach at physical schools, but when they go into distance learning, now they're teaching online from home?
We had a couple options that we provided to teachers. The first was their classrooms available to teach in, so they'd be able to utilize the district's bandwidth. The second is that we provided some teachers with hotspots to potentially provide better bandwidth for them at their homes.
Great, thank you, Chris.
All of our parking lots also have, at our schools, have internet access. And so some people even decided to drive up and stay in their car and access our internet through that avenue as well.
The district office has that capability as well.
We do.
Yeah. And that wasn't really an accident either. I think when we first put wireless internet together, it was all focused on putting it to the inside of the school and not allowing anybody from the outside to use it. And over the years, Chris and the team have intentionally expanded that out so that that can happen and people can use it from around the school in those cases. And boy, it's a good thing that he's done that.
But we did get a grant for additional hotspots and things like that. So we have purchased ones.
Great. Back to Cindy. Cindy Brown, how do you make elementary school safe but feel supportive at the same time? Young kids need socializing.
I think Chris alluded to this earlier when she said, it's almost impossible for our younger learners to not feel the need to hug their teacher or, touch a fellow classmate. So we're not going to be able to guarantee that any of that is not going to happen. And we need to, continue to be supportive and kind to our students as they come in the door and try to meet their needs and yet try to be as safe as possible. So it's not going to be a guarantee that social distancing will be able to be adhered to in all of those situations. And if a student needs support, then they need a hug, then they need to get a hug. So we'll make sure that we are cautious and supportive and careful with our youngest kids especially.
Thank you. And we have
one thing that we did learn from our public health official early on in this process, and it was his opinion that that schools are not necessarily a vehicle of transmission for COVID, and so there's a lot of that happened, and we've learned over the course of the last few months in regards to this this virus. One of the things also that we've learned is the transfer by touch is not necessarily as contagious as definitely the droplets, and that's why we're all wearing masks today. And so we just need to keep that in mind as we're moving forward.
Thank you, Chris. Cindy, what will student pickup and drop off look like at the elementary schools?
Well, our principals are already working on this. They're looking at all entrances and exits to this elementary schools, that there will be more points of entry and exit at our schools. And we will work to have some defined patterns so that parents know when and where students will exit.
And I think this next question may be addressed by Cindy, but may also be chimed in by Kristen. And it really refers to this idea that it's a little safer outside than it is inside as far as contracting COVID-19. And the question is, can classes be held outside when it's not raining?
Yeah, we're in agreement with Kristen and I that, and all of our principals, as much as possible, they'll take advantage to outdoor learning spaces, whether it's on the grass under a tree or at an outside picnic table. They will have access to use those as long as the weather is good for us.
Anything to add, Kristen, or is that good to go?
Yeah, it's the same for secondary, and it's even prior to COVID, right? The teachers would take opportunity to bring their students outside, weather permitting.
Thank you. Is there going to be a health questionnaire that's sent to students on a weekly basis to check for health status or exposure to COVID-19 risk?
Not at this time. There's no intention to do a questionnaire on a regular basis.
There will be signage, however, and I don't know if Jen Taylor, if you're available to talk to what the signage is that we're going to have on posted all over, because there are certain questions that we are going to be asked folks.
So the signage that we'll have will review the questions. If you have a cough or a fever or a temperature over 100.4 or higher, we will have signage that addresses wearing the mask and washing your hands and educational things like that as well.
Thank you. Will water fountains be blocked off and water bottles allowed in classrooms? I think Cindy or Kristen could answer this one.
Yeah, and I'll take this one because it impacts athletics as well. So students will be expected to use their own individual water bottles. The hydration stations will be open for students and staff to fill water bottles, but water fountains will be blocked. And I say athletics because if you think like football, the big water troughs, those devices would not be used as well during this time.
Okay, great. Cindy, some are really concerned about the learning that's taking place with their children. Some students have struggled to really grasp subjects during distance learning, and they may be behind on where they ought to be right now. How will the district help at-risk learners catch up to grade level after what's happened in the spring?
It's a concern, isn't it? We're worried about that as well. And yet we know that if we have our kids in school that we can intervene with them. So elementary will continue to incorporate interventions as much as possible and begin assessing as soon as possible. And as soon as we can get our kids back and we can have the beginning of our school year and things start to settle down and some assessment can take place, we will begin intervening as soon as possible.
Great, thank you, Cindy. And one last question in this group, and it's an interesting question with kind of an interesting idea. Will there be a virtual meeting for students and families to see or meet their new teacher before dropping the kids off for the first time on the first day of school?
Yeah, that can be arranged at the school sites as well as the meet and greet that was mentioned earlier. We're really looking to incorporate a way for people to come to the school or to meet with their teachers virtually, however they're most comfortable, and get them in the classrooms early so that the first day of school people can feel comfortable. But yes, those things are being worked on right now.
And skipping over to Sheila, Sheila, who is it that's going to enforce keeping students home if they have a cough and they get dropped off at school and need to go back home?
First, I just want to remind folks that a cough alone doesn't mean that a student has COVID-19. And if there is a student with a cough that is a concern, then the appropriate staff member on campus, in most cases that might be a nurse or a health tech, would then be making some additional determinations in order to see what other measures need to be taken.
Great. We have a question for Howard Kornblum. Howard's at the podium. He is Director of our English language learner program, and also directs the program around dual immersion, which is what this question, I believe, is about. Howard, one of our parents says, my kids attend the dual immersion school, so online schooling may not really be an option for them. Is it possible to revisit the idea of breaking up the class sizes and having them go fewer days for programs such as dual immersion? Their kids really did really well with that kind of online learning process, but would do better if they had a few days with the teacher.
Thanks, Mr. Gorey. All dual immersion students will be going to school every day, just like all FSUSD students. Currently, the district does not have plans to distinguish dual immersion from other FSUSD instructional programs or schedules. Many DI students also have siblings that attend other FSUSD schools and programs, and it does not make sense to provide a different schedule at DI than other schools in FSUSD. Additionally, the California Department of Education has not yet provided formal flexibility on students attending less than 180 days of school, whether it be done virtually or in person.
Thank you, Howard. A couple of questions now for Jennifer Taylor, risk assessment and human resources. Jennifer, if my child is having a hard time breathing with the mask, can they take it off for a moment and then put it back on just to get their breath?
We will work to ensure the needs of the students who are having difficulty breathing are met, and there's also exemptions to the mask order that will be considered.
And also, how do the social distancing practices being implemented in the district office compare to the practices that are getting established for classrooms and schools?
6-foot social distancing is recommended in the district office as well as the schools to the extent that it is possible to achieve this given the respective environments.
But we know, I think what we know there is that the respective environments are different, right? Our district office is a very different environment than a school, and so we're going to do the best that we can at the school, but it won't look exactly like what we can do at the district office or other offices for that matter. All right, Ken Whittemore, we're back to you, sir. What happens if a staff member refuses to go to work due to the lack of protection provided by the school against coronavirus?
Well, we'll be following all state and local guidelines, and as well as our bargaining agreements as we move forward and transition to opening of our schools. And it is expected that people will be at work. The district does have bargain leave policies, and with each unit, and we will follow those policies if a worker believes they need to use that leave policy.
And thank you, Ken. Will FSUSD be hiring more certificated employees in order to reduce class sizes?
With the hiring, with moving to the virtual academy and the effects that may have on the sites, we believe that we may have smaller class sizes because we may end up being overstaffed in some areas. So that may occur. So we are hiring at this time. Yeah.
Okay. And has the teachers union approved the proposal that we have? And if not, when might that occur?
All of this, again, the district is going to follow all contractual guidelines of our collective bargaining agreements with all of our bargaining units. And we are going to continue to work collaboratively with our labor partners as we get through this to address any concerns they may have about the opening of school.
Thank you. Ken, has the district considered offering year-round school or early, late start times in order to reduce the number of students at school at any one particular time?
We looked at many different options, but year-round schedules are subject to negotiations and bargaining with all units. And so we, at this time, believe that keeping with the current set schedule and the consistency was best for our school district.
And thank you, Ken. There are teachers who come to work even though they're under the weather, they don't feel good, for the sake of not using sick days. Will there be a plan in place to allow teachers to stay home without losing sick days? And will they be reprimanded if they show up to work not feeling well?
Again, these things are all covered with our with our labor organizations and our bargaining contracts. And they accrue sick leave yearly, all employees, and would be able to use that time when needed for any illness that may come up with them throughout the year.
And as always, we take each of these situations, we deal with those with those situations depending on the person. Ken, as an employee of the district with the capability of working remotely, if I choose to send my children to virtual academy, will FSUSD allow me to work remotely as long as it doesn't disrupt the department?
We're going to continue as we transition to full opening, where expectation would be is that employees would be at their workstations and working with their managers at that time to meet the needs of each department.
And finally, Ken, are there enough substitute teachers for regular teacher illness as well as COVID illness?
And recruiting, it's our responsibility to recruit and have as many substitutes available as possible. So we'll do everything we can to have a substitute pool which is large enough to serve the needs of our district at that time. So we will be expanding and doing everything we can to pull in more substitute teachers to assist us in that.
Thank you, Ken. What's left in our hour and a half together, and we've gone through 88 questions. Just so you know kind of where we're at, we're humming through them, but I don't think we're going to get to all 140. So bear with us as we try to get through as many of these as we can. Next up again is Kristen Witt. Kristen, how is it safe to have 34 students in a classroom for more than an hour at a time?
So, Mr. Gorey, I think there have been a lot of answers throughout this presentation this morning that have spoken to this. And so, in phase 4 of in-person instruction happening, the district is having many safety protocols in place, self-monitoring prior to coming to school, face masks, social distancing, hand washing, hand sanitizing, all, working together to assist in minimizing the risk to the students and staff in the classroom.
Thank you. This is also a really important question that a lot of people have on their minds. If we were in a different phase than 4, if we were in 2 or 3, and we had students coming a certain portion of days per week, would you be bundling students that live in the same home or the same area together in order to help accommodate for schedules?
Yes, so the answer to that is yes. If we were to have to go back in our continuum to phase 1, 2, or 3, we would do every effort we could to bundle students from the same family, from the same attendance area. We could not guarantee that every single individual, just based on restrictions of scheduling that may pertain to a certain individual in the family, but yes, that is part of the plan that we would implement.
Okay, thank you. And now you need to put on your prognosticator hat for this next question. Do you anticipate that there will be a regular graduation for this coming school year?
As much as I would love to say yes, that we will hold an in-person ceremony in June of 2021, it's too early to be able to make that determination. And obviously, we would follow the guidelines set forth by Solano County Public Health with respect to large gatherings at that time and make the appropriate decision for everyone's health and welfare.
Thank you. Kristen, can a sport that a student is involved in and participating in outside of school count towards PE credit?
So it can. So we actually have both board policy and administrative regulation for high school students as it pertains to interscholastic athletics and being qualifying for PE waivers. So it's board policy 6146.1 and 6142.7 and the same ARs respectively. And so if a family is interested in getting a PE waiver based on an interscholastic athletic participation, they would just need to reach out to their high school counselor.
Thank you, Kristen. We've kind of touched on this a little bit at the elementary level, but we want to hear a little bit more and having to do with staff as well. What kind of supports will be given to staff and students around emotional well-being during this time?
So we absolutely recognize the need and the support for mental health for both our staff and our students returning from this time of school closure. There's a lot of additional supports that will need to be put into place. As always, every single employee in FSUSD has access to what we refer to as our EAP flyer, which provides different resources in forms of counseling and other supports.
For both our staff and our students, we have counselors, we have school psychologists, we have mental health clinicians, and we will be working, like Dr. McCabe said earlier, on our comprehensive plan as it relates to mental health supports for all of FSUSD as we return.
Thank you. And you may need to explain this question just a little bit to people. I'm not sure. I think it may assume something that people may not know about. But if students stay in the same classes to keep them in what we would call cohorts or families, and teachers end up switching classes, moving from one physical class to another, how will that work for elective classes or maybe AP classes or specialized classes?
So cohorting students becomes much more complex when looking at the high school. It's much easier to cohort both in elementary and even at middle school, but high school becomes much more complex. When there's singleton courses that students take, there's different paths that students take, and you can't just say that all ninth graders go into the same path. So we are currently looking at how we will implement cohorts within the high school setting, and while doing that, still ensuring that students can meet both their A to G requirements for entrance into a UC or CSU, and if they're at Armio and part of the IB program, maintaining their ability to earn an IB diploma, and still providing that capacity for students to take AP courses as they choose. So like I said, it's much more complex, and we are still in the process of drafting what that will actually look like for our high school setting.
Thank you. What's happening on the Solano Community College campuses this fall, and how would Solano Community College electing to continue remote learning affect the early college high school program?
We luckily have a great relationship and partnership with Solano Community College, and as everyone knows, our early college high school program is housed on the Solano Community College campus. Solano Community College came out early, stating that the majority of their courses would go distance learning online, with a few of their lab classes to be held in person. Solano Community College is allowing our early college program to still be on campus utilizing the buildings. And we are working with our child nutrition department for food services because their cafeteria will not be serving food during that time. And so we're working so that there's a seamless transition for child nutrition to be there serving food for our students.
This question seems to be specific to Rodriguez High School, but I think it's good to answer as well for all of the comprehensive high schools, actually every high school that has an officer assigned to it. Seeing that Officer Joe has retired at the end of this last school year, do you have a replacement community service officer for that site?
So the Fairfield Police Department is currently working on hiring an SRO replacement for Officer Joe for Rodriguez High School.
Although, let's be honest, nobody can replace Officer Joe.
That is very true. That is very true.
That's absolutely true. And, even though some, are calling to defund police and separate schools from our police departments, there's no hint of that going on in our school district. Our relationships with the police department are incredibly strong, and the benefits that we receive from that relationship are amazing, and we have no intention of changing that. Right, Superintendent Corey?
That's absolutely.
So I went on a limb there, but we love our police department in Suisun City and Fairfield, and appreciate them so much. Kristen, will tutorial periods be provided at set times with teachers present live so that students can get help if our school goes online again?
Similar to what Dr. Farrar said earlier in one of her answers, if we needed to go back to distance learning on the continuum, we would obviously review our distance learning plan and some of the things we learned from this process and make any needed adjustments. But as of right now, as we've said before, we are at phase 4, which is in-person instruction for August of 2020.
Thank you. And at middle school, there's no homeroom class typically, since students congregate before going to their first class at school. Will there be a homeroom class, or will students have an assigned room so that they can go there instead of being outside just milling about
Right, which is also, it's a good question. And so each school site will need to work on developing their locations for entry for students for the start of the day, and also plans of where students would be located if they arrive early and they're there waiting for their first period class, or even zero period for students that have an earlier class in the day. So each of those structures would look a little bit different based on the school and how the school structures theirs.
Thank you. Will students remain in one classroom around the same students and one teacher in our environments? We've kind of touched on this a little bit before. Is there anything that needs to be added to that, Kristen or Cindy?
Just the same, that we're currently working on those plans of what cohorting the students will look like. And it, like I had mentioned prior, it will be a little bit different in terms of the complexities at a high school, but working on how we will cohort our students at both elementary, middle, and high school for the 2021 school.
Yeah, that's true. It's a little easier at the elementary, and we're going to make sure that we cohort the kids as much as possible throughout the day.
Will there be any school programs such as band, STEM, STEAM, after-school extracurriculars, etc.? What will that look like?
So just like we were able to work on the return to play program for summer conditioning for high school athletics, we will also work to provide extracurricular activities and ensure social distancing and all of the other safety protocols in play, so that students do have some additional activities to do during the year.
Thank you. Liz Tracy is back at the podium to answer another set of questions. Some of these are challenging, but they're great questions from our community. Liz, will students who are being unsafe, for instance, spitting at others, be suspended from school?
My apologies. The administrator's authority to discipline, which would include suspension, is governed by California Education Code 48900. If the administrator determines that the presence of that student causes a danger to persons, they may use their discretion to suspend the student.
So it's kind of a maybe, depends on the situation.
Maybe.
Okay. If the authorities come out, or medical community comes out with a COVID-19 shot, will it be mandatory for kids to get it before they can return to school? I think we've already done this, right? So that might be, I think we've already answered that question.
Yes, we have.
So let's move on to the next one. If early dismissal, will after-school care be provided for working parents who may not be available for early pick?
The district will not be providing childcare. However, the city does have some programs at select sites in Suisun and Fairfield.
And Liz, what is happening with open enrollment in this environment? Has there been any changes to our open enrollment process as a result of COVID?
There have been no changes. It's been a little bit of a slower process.
Okay. And do you anticipate that there will be more children that will be able to be placed at the start of school in virtual academy or virtual school?
We do anticipate that as students enroll in the virtual school, it will open up spots at our comprehensive sites. We do have through the 15th day of instruction into the 2020-21 school year to offer those transfers and place students through open enrollment.
And here's another interesting question. Will there be a handbook in which parents and students have to sign to agree to the new health and safety standards or requirements? If so, how will things be handled if the student or parent does not comply even after signing that agreement?
We will communicate the safety precautions and expectations with all of our families and students. The district will work with families individually that are not complying with those expectations.
Okay, great. Thank you, Liz. We've got a few more questions for Melissa, but I think we're going to have to round it up with just a couple, and then I'll let Superintendent Corey finish us off with any statement that she might have. Melissa, if GATE students are enrolled in the K-8 Virtual Academy, how do you ensure that they have the proper classes?
All GATE students identified that are not part of the magnet program should receive an individual learning plan yearly. Enrichment activities will be provided by the classroom teacher to support that individual learning plan, just as they are in our other non-GATE magnet schools. There are also 2 GATE enrichment Saturdays offered to all GATE identified students across the district, grades 2 through 8, that our students will be eligible to participate in as well from the virtual school.
And Melissa, will books be virtual, all virtual, since there is no, there may not be a real good way to sanitize them?
We are continuing to work on making sure that we maintain digital access to all textbooks. We have also increased our digital access to our library collection for students, but we do still intend to issue textbooks to students on an individual basis because those books are checked out to students individually.
Okay, and do kindergarten students have the option to choose virtual academy?
Kindergarten students may choose to enroll in the virtual academy if they do not wish to participate in the program at their school of residence.
And unfortunately, currently at this time, we do not have transitional kindergarten in our academy.
Yeah, I think that was even the next question as well. So good job, Superintendent Corey. How about this? We'll make this one the last question. Who is expected to be responsible for the student's education while distance learning? I think what we're talking about here is not virtual academy so much as if we're in distance learning mode for the whole district. Is it the teacher or is it the parent who's responsible?
Well, anytime that our students are in a different location than we are as teachers, there's a need to have joint responsibility. Yes, the teacher is responsible for ensuring that student learning is taking place, but in a distance learning setting, there necessitates a need for guidance from the home to be able to support that instruction is ongoing.
Thank you, Melissa. Thank you, staff. This is really, I think it was really great. 110 questions we were able to get through in 90 minutes. And we didn't get to all 140, but the rest of those, including these, will be online as a frequently asked question document. And Superintendent Corey, do you have anything to say as we round it up?
I think a final takeaway is just know that we are going to be doing everything feasibly possible to minimize risk when we reopen our campuses in the fall. Educating our youth is very important to our students' future and to this future of society. And so we feel real strongly about the fact that we need to get people back into school. And just on a final note, I know that it's really easy to find fault and to criticize during times like these, but I just want everybody to know that we are working very diligently, and we really hope that people can assume positive intentions and just know that we're doing the best that we can under these circumstances. We'll continue to update you, and just always feel free to contact us. We want to be as transparent as possible. And this will end our recording. Thanks for viewing.